Well, my goodness, here we are. welcome to this virtual town hall. Sorry for those of you who have been waiting. Hopefully some of you are still there. Let me tell you, in the old days, before all this great technology, I used to do these virtual town halls with my laptop in my hand and maybe a mic. And now we look beautiful. I feel this looks like a little house of cards back here. But that does mean more points of failure. But we have amazing caucus staff. They're working hard. The hamsters are running. The duct tape is in place for us to be on here. If we drop off, well, that means the technology didn't work for us. But we are thrilled to be able to spend some time with Albertans right now, because what I've been hearing everywhere is people just need to be in community, and they just need to talk about these tough times that we're in. And this is our opportunity to be able to do that a little bit tonight. So we are, hopefully, broadcasting on multiple streams tonight. We encourage you to get involved in the chats on the streams, put your comments in. This is about community. It's about all of us being together. So we're playing this by ear, guys. We're working without a net, but it's all good. We're going to go as long as we can, and as long as you're willing to listen to us. And I'm Naheed Nenshi. I didn't introduce myself, leader of Alberta's New Democrats. And tonight I'm joined by my deputy leader, Rakhi Pancholi, and by the amazing Sarah Hoffman, the MLA for Edmonton and Glenora, and our Shadow Minister for Acute Care and Hospitals. So we're looking to talk about separatism and about healthcare, two of the issues that Albertans have really brought up with us, and we're hoping to have that conversation with all of you. Over 150 of you submitted questions in advance, and Rakhi and Sarah are going to feed me some of those questions. We're going to have a conversation. You'll notice I got nothing in front of me. So this is really operating without a net. They're going to ask me these questions, and we're going to talk about Alberta's New Democrats and where we stand and what kind of a government we would be for Albertans. So with that, I've probably gone on too long already. I see Rakhi Pancholi there. Hopefully you can also see Rakhi Pancholi, and we're going to turn it over to her. Hi, Rakhi. How are you?
I'm doing well. There's nothing, you got to wait for good things sometimes, right? So that's what I like to think. We're hanging out, we're having a conversation.
And I've heard you haven't got to episode 6 of Heated Rivalry yet. So
no, that's tonight's watch. I'm looking forward to it very much. No spoiler alerts, anything like that. I'm looking forward to watching it. I've been avoiding social media so I could just be totally fresh watching it. So,
All right, then I won't tell you anything.
Okay.
I will just say, as I told you before, look, I'm a guy who doesn't believe in love or human connections or people. And even I found it pretty touching.
Wow, touch that cold heart of yours, Naheed. Come on.
Right? Cold heart in me. But speaking of cold hearts, boy, that was the worst segue of all time. It is not at all cold here in Calgary. I don't know what it's like in Edmonton, but there's supposed to be plus 16 tomorrow. And one of the great things about this time of year in Calgary is we have a bunch of winter festivals. So I've been enjoying the High Performance Rodeo. I enjoyed the opening of Chinook Blast. Sometimes the opening of Chinook Blast is very, very cold, but it actually has been beautiful this weekend. My birthday was beautiful. Why am I telling you all this? Because I've been out in the community a lot, and I've been talking to a lot of people just on the street, families, kids, people who are concerned about the future of the province. And I'm hearing something very different, and I wanted to test with you if you're hearing the same thing. When we did our Better Together this past summer, we tapped into something. Albertans who are intensely proud to be Albertan, intensely proud to be Canadian, and frankly, we're really angry at our provincial government and Premier Smith for coddling to the separatists. What I'm hearing over the last 2 weeks, though, is a little different. It's still that anger, but there is also a very palpable fear. People are saying, I am scared that these people are going to take away my country. And they're asking me what I call the most Canadian of all questions. How can I help? What can I do? And I'm just curious, is that just people talking to me because I got this face, or what are you hearing in your community and as you travel across the province?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Naheed, that certainly the conversation, there's a fierce patriotism that's been running through our country and through our province, for quite some time now. And yeah, there was a little bit of frustration and anger, but that is mounting into something new. I think fear is something that people are really feeling. They're seeing what's happening in the world right now. The international order seems like it's flipped upside down. They're seeing the advances that the United States has made into to Venezuela, has talked about Greenland. Of course, we know Donald Trump has been talking about annexing Canada and making us a 51st state for some time, but now that's starting to feel really real to people in a way that it wasn't necessarily before. And I think in light of that fear and that worry, the conversation around separatism has taken on a new light, and people are really worried about it. And I think they're quite frustrated because Danielle Smith and the UCP didn't say anything about separatism in the last provincial election. They didn't campaign on being a separatist government, and yet we've seen them over and over do things to actually move this conversation, highlight it, encourage it, and move it to the front of the spotlight. They've changed the laws twice. They've overruled a court decision, all so that separatism can be put on the agenda in Alberta. And we still know that the vast majority of Albertans do not support this. And yet that's what they're focused on instead of the things that most people approach me in the community about, which is they're worried about healthcare, they're worried about education, they're worried about the future of their jobs, and most importantly, they're talking about cost of living.
Yeah.
But yet, the conversation that Danielle Smith is having is all about separatism, and I think that's frustrating people and making them feel very nervous.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the challenge that I'm really having here is I'm not in politics, and you're not in politics because we believe in the politics of anger or grievance or the politics of fear. If your politics are making people angry or upset or scared, well, you're doing it wrong. Yeah. But the problem is that in the world over the last decade, probably the last 15 years or so, we've seen, driven not entirely but partially by technology and algorithms and change, we've seen a lot of politicians say, I'm actually can benefit in the short term from the policies of grievance and anger and fear. And when the Premier is asked, are you a proud Canadian? Right? Do you denounce separatism? She's very reluctant to do that. She said, I don't want to demonize Albertans who believe in separatism. She uses this word salad, a sovereign Alberta within a united Canada. What the hell does that mean? I heard someone say to me, an older gentleman say to me recently, is that like saying I am a single man in the confines of my marriage? But she's obviously trying to play both sides, which is almost worse in my mind than if she really believed in one side or the other. And this worries me a lot because as Albertans, we live under that giant sky, which means our ideas are limitless. We work together. And I think you feel the same I do, Rakhi, that we've created something really special in this country. It's not everywhere in the world like families or yours or mine could come and have a community that invested in them to invest in their future and where we could be successful. I'm not suggesting we're successful because we're politicians, but we've had wonderful lives here and continue to have wonderful lives here. And that doesn't happen everywhere. And I'm deeply concerned that what I thought was careless talk by politicians, and now I'm worried it goes even beyond careless, is going to destroy what we hold dear. And I think a lot of Albertans share that concern. And as you say, if this were going on in a place where people didn't have other worries, we might be having a different conversation. Mm-hmm. But right now, we don't have the luxury to let the Premier and her separatist government be so indulgent. We've got a cost of living crisis. In Calgary, one of the richest jurisdictions, one of the richest cities and one of the richest jurisdictions in North America, 1/3 of people are food insecure every month. That's horrifying. The cost of living is hitting all of us, and it's hitting all of us hard. Our healthcare system, which has been on the brink of collapse for so long, has collapsed in many places. The ambulance and the emergency room systems are not working the way they should. And this government is focused on mollifying separatists. This government is focused on swanning about the Conservative Convention and talking about Pierre Poilievre instead of focused on the things that Albertans really, really need to worry about. And that's what concerns me. And what I hear a lot from Albertans now is, so what are you going to do about it? But also, how can I help? What can I do about it? And I hope that we get to a little bit of that today. But do you want to just talk politics for 1 second? You did a great press conference on Friday in which you talked about this pledge that we put out early last week. Tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, and actually, not to, I want to sing your praises a little bit then, Naheed, because of course my press conference was a follow-up of your press conference in Calgary, where you put out a call to every single MLA to sign a simple pledge to their constituents. And that pledge was intended to make it clear to our constituents where each MLA stands on the issue of separatism. And I announced on Friday that every single one of the Alberta New Democrat MLAs had signed a pledge affirming their commitment to Alberta and to Canada and to firmly oppose separatism and to make that clear and known to their constituents. It was a nonpartisan pledge. Like there was nothing in there that
There was
says,
no
you know,
trap
I'm
in it. We weren't trying to confuse people. It just said, I'm a proud Albertan, I'm a proud Canadian, and I oppose separatism.
100%. And I think that should be a really simple thing for every MLA to do. Because again, when we go back to what were we all elected to do? Well, no UCP MLA was elected on a platform of separatism back in 2023. The Premier certainly wasn't. And yet they've made clear indication that they do want to have that conversation, that they do want to move that agenda forward. And so I think Albertans have a right to know where their MLAs stand on this. Yeah. And they should be, if they are supportive of separatism, they should be able to look their constituents in the eye and say that that's what they support. And so it's a very simple pledge. And, you know, I think that every Albertan should be able to look at their MLA and say, I know where you stand on separatism. So I guess I would say to those Albertans who don't have an NDP MLA, I think you should reach out, contact your UCP MLA or your independent MLA, send an email to their office, tag them on social media, and ask them that question. Why won't you sign this pledge saying whether or not you support separatism? I, as a constituent, have a right to know. So I encourage all Albertans to do that right now.
I think we all have a right to know. You know, let's remember that in the 2023 election, in the by-elections that we had this past year in 2025, there was a separatist option. So people could vote for that option if they wanted to. They didn't. No. They hardly anybody did. But, you know, the UCP never, ever ran on this. And you're being uncharacteristically polite. I'm going to be less polite, if you don't mind, for a second here. The Premier has to make a stand. This is too dangerous a game. We heard her on her radio show last summer when she was asked, why are you coddling the separatists? She actually dropped the veil for a second. And instead of saying what she usually does, well, Albertans have grievances and we need a better deal with Ottawa, she actually said, because if I don't pander to the separatists, my party will split and I'll lose the next election. You know what, Danielle Smith? This country is way too precious for your political survival. It's way too precious for my political survival or Rakhi's political survival. We got to be above all of this. And the word salad you're using as you're trying to implement the free Alberta strategy as you're moving the goalpost isn't fooling anyone. But the thing that bothers me about this is last week, the Premier said 3 completely different things about her MLAs and her caucus and where they stand. And I should point out that I actually committed what in politics might be a fatal error, which is I stood up on Monday and held up this pledge and said, and all of my MLAs will sign it. And the fatal error I made is, as you recall, as the deputy leader, I kind of forgot to ask my MLAs if they would sign it, right, before I got in front of the cameras. And normally one doesn't do that. Normally one tells their caucus things like this. So sorry to my caucus, but it wasn't a big deal because, of course, every one of my caucus members signed it. They didn't have to be coerced into signing it because that's why they're in this caucus. That's why we're a team, because we share certain values. And this is one of the bedrock values that we all share. So I didn't have to ask. I didn't have to say, are any of you separatists? Because if you felt that way, you probably would have left this caucus a long time ago. Because that's not who we are. But getting back to the Premier. Last week on Wednesday, she said, every one of my caucus members are united and we are proud Canadians within a sovereign Alberta, blah, 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 blah. But she started with the we are proud Canadians part. Then there was a news article that said several of her MLAs have actually signed the separatist petition. And then she said, well, I don't police my MLAs. They can do whatever they want, which is fascinating because she's already fired 2 of her caucus members. She doesn't have very many more to fire. She's got a tiny majority. But she fired one for daring to ask for an inquiry into corruption in her government. She fired the other one for daring to advocate for Northern Alberta in the budget. So she polices those things. But she doesn't police whether you believe in Canada. She doesn't police whether you lied when you swore your oath to become an MLA, to swear allegiance to this place. She doesn't police that. But then the next day, when she was caught on that, she said, well, I have no idea if any of my caucus members signed this. Shouldn't you know that? Shouldn't you know who your caucus members are and what they stand for? Isn't that kind of important? So I would say to every member of the UCP caucus, hey, be proud of who you are. If you're a separatist, tell us. You obviously believe in it, so why lie about it? Why hide it? Just tell us. Tell your constituents, and by the way, tell your caucus mates, because they deserve to know who they're sitting in the caucus room with. It's not fair to them either. And certainly as we've been sitting in the legislature this fall, you know, Rakhi, you sit next to me, and we look out at the world, and I'm telling you, I see a lot of people who are questioning their life choices right now on the other side of that aisle. So they deserve to know too. And I don't understand why you wouldn't just tell it. If you're a separatist and you're proud of it, be proud. Be proud of who you are. And tell everyone how you feel.
And I think the Premier is trying to play Albertans for fools, right? Because if she... The reason why she's saying she doesn't police, and she knows that she has MLAs in her caucus that do support separatism, and that's why she's skirting around. But you know, Albertans aren't being fooled. It's a pretty fundamental, basic, easy question to answer: do you or do you not support separatism? You know, like as I mentioned, the Premier has changed the laws twice and overturned court decisions in order to put that question before Albertans, and yet she can't answer that question herself. I just actually really quickly, Naheed, I want to go to a question that I think came from our, one of the questions that came in from Brian, who wanted to know about, you know, why don't we support just letting this happen, letting this referendum happen? Like, isn't that democracy? Don't we support democracy?
Why don't you believe in
what would you say to that?
Rakhi Pancholi?
Yeah. I'm here because of democracy.
Well, democracy is one thing, but constantly rigging the scales is another thing. So, you know, as Rakhi has pointed out, the government keeps moving and changing the law to make it easier for the separatists and only the separatists to be able to do this work. Now, that's not quite true. Corb Lund and the coal mining petition managed to slide through. But let's put it this way. The referendum legislation used to say you needed a giant number of signatures and you had only 3 months to collect them. And when Thomas Lukaszuk started his Forever Canada thing this summer, he had to operate under those old rules. And a lot of us, and I don't mind saying me included, were skeptical he'd be able to get there. He's certainly vastly surpassed. I shouldn't say he, the team, the whole group of Albertans who was doing
10,000 volunteers out there. Yeah.
10 or 15,000 volunteers. They vastly surpassed what they were supposed to do. But they had to get this massive number of signatures in a short period of time. The government then changed the legislation because they thought that Lukaszuk had kind of played them a little bit. So, or was about to play them, mixing up my timeline a little bit. But the government changed the legislation to require fewer signatures in a longer period of time. But then when they saw what Thomas and the Forever Canada team were able to do, they changed the legislation again to require, to actually allow the separatist question to go through because it had been ruled unconstitutional by a judge. And then, when they realized that lots of petitions were going on out there, they changed the rules again from $500 deposit to start one of these petitions to $25,000. The separatists got the old price. And so they have been, this isn't democratic at all. They've been trying and trying and trying to put their thumb on the scale in favor of this one thing. But ultimately, if we end up having a referendum, everyone will have their say. There's nothing wrong with that. But it is a huge distraction. We already have heard from the Alberta Chamber of Commerce that talk of a referendum has essentially frozen investment in Alberta. It's cost us jobs, and it's not helping us focus on the things that are really here. But I would say, too, I think it was Brian who asked the question, well, if we really truly believe in democracy, then we also believe in the free access to information. So if the UCP is supporting the separatist cause, if MLAs are helping the separatist people with their petitions, then we deserve to know that. All voters deserve to know that. And that could actually lead to some voters liking them more. That could lead to a lot of voters saying, what kind of game are you playing here? But democracy works when information is free.
And I'll add to that too, Naheed, that, you know, because the rules have changed so many times, let's keep in mind that 500,000 Albertans signed that Forever Canadian petition and made it clear that they do not want to entertain separatism, that they want to stay proudly part of Canada. And that's a pretty clear democratic statement as well. So,
100%.
you know, the separatists who are trying to get the petition signed right now, even if they meet the threshold of 177,000, that's still roughly about a third, just over a third the number that of Albertans who have already said that they actually don't want to entertain separatism. So when we talk about democracy, I think that's really important to point out. And, you know, as an elected official, as we all are with the Alberta NDP, we also reflect the views of our constituents. That's our job, we're representatives. And I can tell you that without a doubt, the vast majority of my constituents do not support separatism. So when I say, and I take the pledge saying that, you know, I oppose separatism, I am reflecting democratically the values and the position of my constituents. And that's an important thing that, you know, our democratic system relies upon us to do that. So we all took the pledge, Naheed, right? All the Alberta New Democrats took the pledge, and that's step one. And Albertans are watching, like, we want to know what you think the next step is. What do you think you want to do in order to make this fight against separatism really clear, to keep this government focused on the issues that matter to you? This is a live event, so please drop into the comments below, you know, your ideas, your thoughts about how to take this movement further and to make sure that the government hears loud and clear that you want to know their position on separatism. And then I'm just going to go to another question that came from YouTube. Dude, that's the name of the person on YouTube, says, I'm concerned that, I'm concerned that the prospect of a referendum will create economic disaster even if the referendum fails. I'm considering moving provinces preemptively, and what would you say to people like me?
Please don't move. Alberta is worth fighting for. But your concerns are very real. You know, I've been talking for a long time about kind of the head arguments and the hard arguments on this, right? We've heard from so many people who just say, I don't care about the economics or the tax arguments or whatever. I love Canada. I've fought hard for this country. People have fought and died for this country, and I'm here. But the head arguments are also important, the intellectual arguments. And so we know that we have lots and lots of examples of this. So when we look at the United Kingdom since Brexit, they've gone through a decade of economic stagnation. You know, back in 1967, before either of us were born, Expo 67 in Montreal, the Canadian Centennial, right, was clearly in Montreal. It had to be in Montreal. Montreal was a world-leading city, right? It was where culture and art and finance all happened. And then the FLQ crisis, the separatist movement, really led to now 50 years of economic decline for Quebec. 338 head offices left Quebec right away. And some people say that there were 600 or 700 more. You know, some of them moved to Alberta. Canadian Pacific is in Alberta now. And we have to ensure that we're not seeing that kind of economic strife. And it's already happening. New investment in Alberta, according to the Alberta Chamber of Commerce, has frozen to almost nothing. And we want to build a pipeline. What company is going to invest 34 or 35 or 40 billion dollars in building a pipeline that they don't know what country it's going to end in, that they don't know if it has to cross an international border? So it's very clear that this kind of conversation has already had economic impact, and it will continue to have bad economic impact. But the answer is not to leave. The answer is to stay here and fight for the Alberta that we all believe in. That's critical, and I know we're going to do it. And I know we will succeed in doing it, and I know that we will be able to work with our neighbors who are feeling differently, who are angry, who have been whipped up by this government, to help them understand the value of working in community here, because that's what's always built Alberta.
You know, and I couldn't agree more that I think we're all united around the feeling that what's good for Alberta is good for Canada. And so we are always interested in making sure that we are advancing Alberta's interests nationwide, but also internationally. And that is why the impact of even the conversation of separatism is so negative for our province. It really takes away those opportunities that Alberta thrives on, right? Those opportunities for innovation and investment and research. And, you know, it's the the impact on Quebec wasn't because they had a referendum that voted yes to secede. Actually, I mean, it was the conversation for years and the referendum itself that led to that economic decline. And that's what's been our concern all along. This isn't a future problem. This is a current problem. Business, as we all know, thrives on certainty and stability. And it doesn't make sense for Danielle Smith to both be trying to get a big pipeline project, to be advancing our economic fortunes going forward, but at the same time advancing the agenda of separatism. The two things don't go together, but I think that just goes to show sort of the pickle, to use an old-fashioned term, that Danielle Smith has really put herself in, because she's talking out of both sides of her mouth a little bit.
Well, and when you listen to, the leaders of the separatist movement, they say, oh my gosh, Canada is in bed with communist China, but we need to build a pipeline. Where do they think that oil is intended to be sold? None of it makes sense. None of it is logical. I want to be very, very clear about something. Alberta has very legitimate concerns with the Federation, with how we've grown, how we've outgrown a lot of what is going on with the Federation. But here's the thing. Nothing that this government is doing, and especially not stoking the fires of separatism, is actually solving the problem. So yes, we have an MOU in place. That's a great first step. A lot of stuff in that MOU is stuff I've been advocating for years as the mayor of Calgary and now in this role. But it's not a victory for Alberta. It's a goal in the first period. There's a lot of hockey left to be played. And playing that hockey means approaching this thoughtfully, with respect, and actually getting stuff done. It's never been clear to me that this government wants to get stuff done, because they rise on a perpetual engine of anger. And if they actually get stuff done and people aren't angry anymore, and then they go, well, in that case, can we focus on healthcare or education or all the other things this government has screwed up? It doesn't actually help them very much. And so I just constantly have to remind people, the Premier goes on and on and on about how separatism was caused by 10 years of Justin Trudeau, who last I checked was not, in fact, the Prime Minister anymore. Mm-hmm. But in those 10 years of Justin Trudeau, oil and gas production rose to record levels. It's at a record level today. It's higher than it's ever been, despite or because of, I don't know, the federal government, because of the innovative people who work in the sector and who are making this thing work. But also, only one pipeline has been built to Tidewater in recent memory. Who built that pipeline? That would be in the 4 years that Alberta was not under Conservative rule. Conservatives have built exactly 0 miles of pipeline to Tidewater in my lifetime. Mm-hmm. Rachel Notley, working with the federal government instead of picking fights with the federal government, and her NDP colleagues got the Trans Mountain Pipeline built. And if you're wondering what that means, the only reason that Alberta's deficit is only $10 billion under this provincial government, a shocking deficit, is because of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, because it has shortened or shrunk the WTI Western Canadian Select differential. That's a complicated way of saying money has flowed from that pipeline. Yeah. So yes, we need more pipelines. We need more export capacity. We need to do that in a way that protects the environment. We need to go back to the grand bargain that Rachel Notley had made. But you don't do that by just keeping people angry all the time. And so stoking the fires of grievance don't actually solve the problems. And as for me, this government would rather fight than win. But as for me, and I certainly know for you, Rakhi, we like to win.
Yeah.
And we got to figure out ways to win and address these grievances without just making people angrier and angrier.
Absolutely. Could not agree more. We want to get stuff done. Speaking of getting stuff done, we have about 10 minutes left and on this topic, on separatism. And then we're going to move on to... Yeah, she is. But I wanted to ask just 2 more questions that came from our YouTube feed. The first one, maybe I'll take a quick stab at it because it's kind of in my lawyer brain. Had Chris T asks, Forever Canada, so now what about that question? Will both of those questions get asked? And that's a really good question, Chris. And I think going back to my old-fashioned term of the pickle, I think Danielle Smith is going to have a tough time figuring out what to do here. We know that the Forever Canada petition, well exceeded the number of signatures that they needed. There's going to be a committee struck in the legislature as soon as we return at the end of February. And that committee is going to have to weigh the question of whether or not to recommend to the government that question go to a petition or does it go to a vote in the legislature? Both of those options are probably not palatable to Danielle Smith because, of course, she's made a promise to her separatist buddies that they're going to get the petition question on separatism. And if we have a vote in the legislature, that means those MLAs who've been avoiding trying to sign this pledge and say their position on separatism are going to have to take a stand and say one way or the other whether they support staying forever part of Canada. Both of those outcomes are not great for the Premier, but she's really opened this can of worms, honestly. But I'm doing all these metaphors right now, Naheed. And so,
Could have gotten rid of this so easily. She could have taken advantage of Thomas Lukaszuk and Forever Canada and said, well, geez, they just want to vote in the legislature. We'll just have a vote on whether we believe in Canada. And it would have ended. And as I said in the legislature one day, listen, we're all voting for it. So if only 4 of you show up and vote for it, then this thing goes away forever.
Yeah.
But as you say, that's not the game she's playing. Rakhi, before I forget, when you said your lawyer mind, you reminded me of something, which is at the beginning, and I'm going to ask you this question as well, but at the beginning of the session today with all the hamsters and duct tape and everything happening, I did neglect to do one thing, which is I neglected to talk about the land we're on.
Yeah.
But this is really important for this conversation because unlike Quebec and unlike British Columbia, every square inch of Alberta is covered by treaty.
That's right.
And certainly we've heard a very rare, completely united front among all the Indigenous nations in Alberta staunchly opposing this. We had a judge actually say that the referendum question is unconstitutional because it doesn't address the issue of treaty rights. This is a very big deal. The Sturgeon Lake Cree is taking up the fight on this in the courts right now on behalf of, or with the backing of, I shouldn't say that because I don't know, but, with all of the Indigenous nations standing behind. What's your sense of that? I mean, that is a critical issue here, and a lot of folks have been asking me, well, what happens with Indigenous rights should this thing go forward?
Well, I think it goes again to show the disregard that the Premier and the supporters of separatism have for the legal foundations of our federation, of our treaty, of our land, of the peoples who live on this land. And they can live in a pie-in-the-sky world where they are always in some sort of state of grievance with the federal government or whoever is in power that they're upset with at the time. But the reality is that the land that they're on, that we are all on, the land that they are fighting to separate from Canada doesn't belong to them. It belongs to treaty and it belongs to all of us. And so that is the most fundamental misunderstanding that they have about how separatism is going to work, along with all the other pieces of how are we going to build a pipeline if we're our own country and do we have our own passports, do we have our own currency? None of that has been thought through in any realistic way. But fundamentally, this land is not the separatists to bargain away. It is not theirs to vote away in a referendum. This land belongs to all treaty people.
States and start to make deals with the Americans that would put us in debt to the Americans forever if we don't even become the 51st state. It's certainly not their place to do that. And it's shocking to me that Premier Smith won't even denounce extraterritorial negotiations with Trump and his administration.
That's what I was going to ask about really quickly, Naheed, just on that piece, that question, because we had a question from somebody in the chat asking about that foreign interference. We know that it's been published that a lot of those separatists who are leading the cause here have been having conversations with U.S. administration officials. And what is your thoughts on that?
A lot of people across this country have been lighting their hair on fire about foreign interference from places like China or India. Mm-hmm. And they're oddly quiet now when that foreign interference is not hidden and it's coming from the Trump administration. I mean, let's be clear. Let's be clear on this one. The Premier's strategy vis-a-vis the U.S. has been to cozy up to Trump. She was so excited that she got into Mar-a-Lago and met him for 5 seconds to take a photo, and she thought in those 5 seconds she'd convince him to get rid of all tariffs. This all plays into Trump's hands. It gives the U.S. all the cards. So to me, it's horrifically ironic in the Alanis Morissette sense that these guys who are talking about independence are actually playing into the hands of Trump. They want the U.S. to loan us $500 billion so we will forever be in debt to the U.S. And in independence, and putting that in the biggest air quotes I can, Alberta, under their vision, would be far less independent than it is today. And this is a big problem, and I'm shocked that the Premier can't even bring herself to say, hey, people who are not elected, who have no democratic legitimacy, should not be negotiating on behalf of the rest of us with Donald Trump and his regime.
And, we know that these folks are friends of the Premier's. There's just photos taken of her at the Federal Conservative Convention just this past weekend with some of them. She should be clearly telling them and denouncing them, and then letting Albertans know that she has denounced them, because any of this kind of activity is unpatriotic. It is, undermining Alberta's sovereignty and Canada's sovereignty. And so it should be, again, an easy thing for the Premier to do. Sign that pledge, say what your position is on separatism, and denounce those who are trying to cozy up to the U.S. to take over our province.
Listen, the president of the UCP has said that he believes that the majority of the UCP and his executive are separatists. He has said that if these guys get the signatures, the UCP should take a vote of its members on if they should officially become a separatist party. So the Premier's nervous about this stuff, right? She's nervous because she feels that she owes her political skin to these folks. Certainly David Parker, who was a huge proponent of Danielle Smith going forward, is now, a big mouthpiece for the separatist movement. What did she think was going to happen?
Yeah.
You know that internet meme? I voted for the face-eating leopards party, but I didn't think the leopards would eat my face. Maybe she needs to meet a guy called Jason Kenney and see what happened to him when he tried to cozy up to these extremist factions, right? This was always going to happen. So with that, Rakhi, I can see what the viewers probably can't, which is that our friend Sarah Hoffman is joining you. So thank you for this discussion. Thank you for this conversation. There will be many, many more conversations, but I want to end here, which is a lot of on this topic, and then we'll go to healthcare. The number one question folks have been asking me on this is, what can I do? And there is a lot you can do. So right now, first thing you can do is call your UCP MLA's office and ask them to sign the pledge, or ask them why they won't. But there's a lot of other things that'll happen, and we're going to roll some of these out. We're going to give people an opportunity to get more active, to get more loud. Folks have been giving me ideas, and I'm sure that we've got some in the chat today, though they won't let me have a computer at these town halls because I look down too much. But, for example, someone told me, I just want to see a lot of Canadian flags, right? I want to put a Canadian flag in my window or on my flagpole. And, do it, man. Right? National Flag Day. The flag was designed right here in Alberta by George Stanley. And it's National Flag Day on February 15th. So that's one thing to do. A lot of people have asked me, you guys signed a pledge. Where do I sign my pledge? So we're going to give you all the opportunity to do things like that. But we want more ideas from more Albertans on how to get engaged, because this isn't about politics. It's about our country. And we want to hear lots of Albertans speak out loudly and proudly for the future of this country. So with that, thank you, Rakhi. I don't know what happens next, so I'm just going to say thank you, Rakhi, and then we'll figure out where we go from there.
Well, I am just greeting my good friend Sarah Hoffman, who just joined. She just snuck right in. It's like you wouldn't have even noticed her.
It's like a ninja.
Sarah, I think we're having a little chat about the fact of what we're hearing from people in our constituency, right? And so separatism is a big topic, but I know that's not the only topic, right, that everybody is focused on. I'm sure your inbox is as full as mine, and you're probably getting stopped everywhere you go. Like, what are you hearing from folks right now?
Yeah, number one is around healthcare. Almost always. The exception was in the fall for that month when families were in chaos, and probably longer than a month, with education being the number one topic. But we're back to healthcare, and it's not just people my mom's age who are concerned about it. There's a lot of people who are reaching out to me, and I think especially after, somebody our age died in the emergency room over the holidays, and the government says now that they're going to do an investigation, but it's moving very slowly, and it seems like it's focused more on trying to cover up things for the government than about making sure that there are improvements made to the healthcare system.
Well, and I think what's really striking me is that, for example, when it comes to healthcare, like those stories are everywhere of people having unbelievable experiences waiting or seeking care and not being able to find it. You know, the case over the holidays was very stark and was very shocking as, you know, a father of, you know, young kids. And, but, you know, just in my constituency office last week, while I was there, a young man called, just graduated high school last year, and he called because he was very upset because he was experiencing paralysis on one side of his face, and he'd gone to the ER, and he waited for hours and hours and hours and wasn't seen and got scared and left. And you know, he didn't know what to do next. And luckily he was able to get a hold of a doctor, but he's waiting for a referral to, you know, to see somebody. But he panicked, and like, that's a normal story now. Or, you know, I'm in a Facebook group with a lot of, you know, moms in my constituency, in my community. And one of them was like trying to get advice from the group about where to take her mother-in-law who had just called her and fallen down. And she was worried that she'd broken a bone, but she's like, I don't want to take her to an emergency room. I'm scared to do that. Do you all have advice about where I can take my mother-in-law? Like, that's where we're at now. People are like, you know, getting that kind of group advice from Facebook because they're worried that the care they don't need is in their community. So these are not one-off stories. These are like becoming sort of a common experience. And it's really shocking, especially when we can't really say we can't give the immediate help that people need.
Go to the emergency room is the answer, though. Like, if you're afraid that you're, you know, if you're delivering a baby, if you're worried you're dying, if you've broken something, and it's not a small fracture, like if you break your finger and there's a Medi-Center still open or your doctor's office has somebody on call, go there. But otherwise, please do go to the emergency room. It's really important that we go, that we ask for help, and we shouldn't be worried as individuals about what's happening and if there's going to be a huge wait. The government should be worried about that, and the government should be putting the resources into the front lines. They should be working with healthcare workers. I've talked to healthcare workers this week who they themselves, like a nurse practitioner, knew that they should be at the hospital and should be admitted, was having a major health episode in their first trimester, showed up at the emergency department, waited 12 hours, and still eventually got seen and now is being treated as an outpatient. But like, show up, ask for help when you need it, and the government should be taking this seriously. They should be acting on the emergency measures and making sure that everyone has the care that they need.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. It's going to be more important than ever that, you know, those stories that people are experiencing, you know, they share them with us as elected officials, but I also think that it's important more than ever too, because it feels like, you know, the messages we all get on social media are different algorithms, there's different sources, and I feel like people need to just talk more to each other and tell their stories and share their experiences so that they know they're not alone, and that government should be stepping in to support Albertans. That's their job, that's their responsibility. And so stories are not just stories, there are lived experiences, and I think they connect us to each other, remind us of our shared values.
Absolutely. So Naheed, we held a press conference. Was that only yesterday?
I don't even know, man. Yes, it was yesterday. It's how I kicked off my birthday.
There we go. Tell us a little bit about your birthday and that press conference.
I had a great birthday, thank you very much, supporting a lot of local businesses here in town. And it was funny because the Calgary Tower on my birthday is always lit up in purple. And so I always tell people it's because it's my birthday, or because it's Sarah Hoffman's favorite color. But it's actually for Eating Disorders Week, which happens to be around my birthday every year. And I have to tell you a little bit ironically, I shall we say, supported a lot of local restaurants over the last weekend with great friends and great family. That was lovely. But it was also lovely to kick off my birthday with you, Sarah, and with Dr. Luann Metz, who's the MLA for Calgary Varsity and the chair of our commission on the future of healthcare, as well as the amazing Janet Aramenko, who is the MLA for Calgary Curry and our shadow minister for mental health and addiction. And what we did yesterday was we really were focused on a few demands. You know, a week or so ago, we actually asked that three things happen within the healthcare system. The first is that we declare a state of emergency. We know that what's happening in emergency rooms right now is not normal. It's not just because of a bad flu season. We often get bad flu seasons. But this is something that people who work in the system tell us they've never seen before. The second was to create a centralized command that would actually work on solving this problem. Because one of the many, many problems with turning one agency, AHS, into 4 healthcare providers and 7 other organizations, 11 organizations, each with their own CEOs, each with their own management structures, is that people aren't working together anymore. So we said it's important to pull together a centralized command that can really look at the stuff we can do to keep people from going into the emergency room. For example, can we extend the hours of urgent care centers? Can we fund people to do some of that work in the community? With the people who run the emergency rooms, that's Acute Care Alberta and and the people that they contract to, which include AHS and Covenant Health, and Assisted Living Alberta, which is all about where do people go once they get out of hospital. So this system has been terribly broken and terribly fractured, and we talked about bringing together that central command again. And finally, we said we need to hear from the government. It's been over a month since that young father died at the Grey Nuns Hospital. We know there have been many other cases since then. And the 4 health ministers, plus the Minister of Infrastructure, there's 5 of them now, have done a couple of press conferences, maybe 1.5 press conferences. But they haven't treated it as an emergency. They haven't talked to us about what we need to do, what they are doing to fix this. So we asked that they call the legislature back early so we can have an emergency debate on healthcare, which sounds very like, Sarah and I get to debate. But what it really is an opportunity for the Premier to stand up in the legislature and talk to all Albertans about what her government has done. Right now, we feel like their government has done nothing. Their one and only promise was that they were going to bring in this idea of what's called I think I've got it right, Sarah, triage liaison physician, which is a way of saying they're going to have physicians work in the waiting room to help people in the waiting room before they're admitted into emerge. Now, the thing about this is, number one is all emergency room physicians do that now because there aren't enough beds in emerge. But number two is, where were they going to magically find these physicians to do this work? And my understanding is it was supposed to launch on Sunday, on February 1st, and they haven't been able to find people to do the work. So this is a very real problem, and it needs to be treated like one. So Sarah, I talked a lot, as I normally do, because I know you were also getting into position on the other side here, but I think I covered it off, yeah?
You did great. The only thing I want to add to the triage situation, because I've had a number of emergency staff reach out to me, is that you can't do a proper full assessment in the middle of an emergency room.
Sure.
Asking somebody their health history, all these types of things. And there are lots of doctors who are willing to work extra shifts if it means that there's somebody somewhere they can examine patients and that they can admit them somewhere. So it's no wonder that it's been so chaotic. But yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up. The next question is kind of a personal one, and
Sure.
But I want to read it for you here today, and it's from Cher, who asks if you're doing okay, and says that they noticed that your eyes being a little bit unusual, and they want to make sure that you're healthy.
Ah, that's sweet. Thank you for doing that. I appreciate the question. Yeah, I'm going to take my glasses off. Look at my eyes. This has been something that's been going on for me for quite some time. And I always say, if you're going to have a super rare chronic condition, you may as well have one that doesn't hurt, doesn't itch, doesn't impact your eyesight, isn't going to kill you, and is purely cosmetic. The challenge is, of course, in this job, purely cosmetic when you're on TV every day means a lot of kind people like Cher go, "Are you okay?" and give me great ideas about things to take down the swelling on my face. The chamomile tea bags did not work. But I don't mind telling people that, when our healthcare system works, it really works. And the frontline workers and the doctors and the nurses and the LPNs, who are, of course, nurses, the people who are working in the system, really do a great job. And when you have a super rare condition, if you really want to Google it, you can look it up. It's called Morbihan syndrome. People are really trying hard to figure stuff out. But Sarah, I will tell you that one of the and we're going through a lot of treatments trying to figure this out. We'll figure it out. But Sarah, I will tell you that one of the treatments that has shown a bit of promise is ivermectin. So there you go, folks. Ivermectin actually does work for something.
That's way to bring some humor and levity to a very personal question. So
I don't mind. I don't mind. We have to live in this world. So thank you for asking, Cher.
And the next one's from David. It's on YouTube, and it said, the sad thing is, I believe it's regular Albertans that are facing these wait times are those who need it least or the wealthy being fast-tracked. So what do you have to say about that?
Well, very late in the legislative session, the government, after reading an article in the Globe and Mail that leaked what they were planning on doing, announced with no advance notice a bill called Bill 11. Now, ironically, it was Bill 11 under the Klein government, the same number of bill, that looked at privatizing the healthcare system back, 20 years ago now, longer.
About that.
And certainly, no, actually much longer because it's 2026. I think 20 years ago was the 90s. It was not. But in any case, and Premier Klein at the time backed down because Albertans didn't want it. And this fall, the government brought forth Bill 11 without any advance consultation. We saw it for the first time when it hit our desks when they introduced it in the House, which essentially privatizes the healthcare system, bringing in for-profit American-style system, allowing people to pay privately for services that used to be only offered publicly. And this is hard to talk about in many ways because for folks who are really suffering, people who are in a ton of pain, people who have said, well, I could pay privately for my hip surgery in Ontario or Mexico or Turkey, why shouldn't I be able to do that in Alberta? It's hard to have this conversation, but what we know is that every system that we have seen that has instituted this dual-tier system, sure, people who can afford it might get fast-tracked, but it means the waiting list for people in the public system grows longer. So the analogy I always use is if you're at Canadian Tire and you're in a really, really long line and you hear an Entercom announcement saying, if you pay an extra $5 or $10 or $20, we've opened up an express line for you. But you get to the front of the express line, you realize it's the same cashier operating both lines. So the non-express line gets longer and longer and longer. So the government keeps talking about European systems. They say it's not American style, it's European style. But the thing is, there is no European style healthcare. They keep quoting different countries that have vastly different systems as though it's just the same. And they're making it up as they go along. They say wait for the regulations, which means stuff that you and I won't debate in the legislature, that we won't vote on. And the regulations will fix it, but they haven't given us any idea of what those regulations will be like. So they've broken the healthcare system. Now, whether they did that on purpose or they did it because they don't know what they're doing, I don't know. Usually when a government screws up this badly, there's only two answers. You did it on purpose, or you don't know what you're doing. Malice or incompetence. With this government, I kind of feel like we've got both going on. But what is very clear is they don't know how to fix it. And they are running around trying every possible patch on the holes in the dike, and none of them are working. And so I'm deeply, deeply concerned that the damage they're going to do to the system because they just want to break it, because frankly they were mad that you had to wear masks for a while there, is going to lead to irreparable harm. And we've got to be able to fix it now. And one of the best politicians I know loves to use a line that I will use. She often says, let's make healthcare boring again. I think her name is Sarah Hoffman.
Why, thank you very much, dear leader.
And that's what we need to be able to do. We need to be able to have healthcare be something that's there when you need it, that you don't have to worry about. And I want to, sorry, Sarah, I'm talking too much, but I want to really underline what you were saying during the transition there, which is don't be scared to go to the hospital, folks.
Yeah.
Go to the emergency room. There are hardworking, amazing frontline workers. They're going to look after you. It might take more hours than you want it to take, but it's better than being at home and not knowing. So these folks are there and they're working for you, and we want to build a healthcare system that you don't have to think about, that you don't have to worry about, that's there when you need it. And I think that's a pretty safe goal, and Luann Metz and others are working on what that looks like, and we're going to have a lot of conversations with Albertans coming up.
Absolutely. Before I do the next question, I just want, you know that one of my hobbies is stand-up. Mm-hmm. And have you heard of the comic Des Bishop yet?
No, I'm not a big comedy guy. Sarah, by the way, folks, stand-up comedy all the time, headlined at Yuck Yucks a couple weekends ago, so we're very excited for Sarah.
Featured. I did not headline.
Oh, I don't know the difference between those words. I'm just going to say you're famous.
So I'll tell you a little bit about what Des was talking about. He's, a New York guy, grew up in Queens, and he says people who talk about public medicine being being anti the economy are beyond. He uses a bunch of colorful language, but basically his message is, if you have a social safety net in a single payer system where everyone can get the care that they need, people can take more risks in their life in terms of being entrepreneurs, not needing to have private insurance, not being able to, start that new business that you might want to start because you need to have that private insurance or you need to have an employer who's going to pay your extra medical costs. And he thinks that one of the best things we can do for a creative economy is make sure that we're investing in one another and having that social safety net.
Not just a creative economy. One of the weird things about me that you well know, Sarah, is I take everything incredibly seriously. And I study everything to the nth degree. So I actually know a fair bit about healthcare economics. And I did a lot of my graduate work in this field. And one of the most shocking things to me when I got to grad school in the US is I started with the premise that public healthcare is the right thing, that everyone should have access. I shouldn't say public healthcare. I started with the premise that everyone should have access to healthcare. And what surprised me was that I couldn't start there. I had to convince people that healthcare was a right. And one of the arguments I ended up finally making that convinced some people is you don't want to sit next to someone with undiagnosed TB on the bus.
Yeah.
And so when we start with that most basic of values, that everyone should A, deserve to be able to be healthy, but B, that everyone, like my family, growing up incredibly poor, never had to worry that if, God forbid, someone fell ill, that would lead to financial ruin. Something that's completely out of your control would ruin you financially.
Yeah.
And so I think in Canada, we start with that premise, right? That everyone deserves a right to be healthy. And the question is, how do we make that happen? And what's fascinating to me about all of this is the provincial government has really sort of said, well, it's just so expensive. They've been in power for 6 years. They haven't opened a single critical care bed.
Yeah.
And nowadays they pretend that they were just shocked by the increase in the population. Never mind the Alberta is Calling campaign. But they didn't realize none of those people moving to Alberta that they invited to Alberta were bringing a doctor with them, bringing a hospital bed with them, bringing a classroom with them. This is an absolute failure to prepare. And Sarah, when you were the Minister of Health back in the day, it was very boring. And you and I had some fights about EMS, and we fixed it. And EMS call times were 7 minutes, right?
We found solutions. And the outcome that we both wanted was to save lives.
Right. But also, you made a deal with the doctors.
Yes, we did.
And that deal attracted more physicians to Alberta. And I always love it because, I care about the bottom line a lot. I love it when you tell the story about what happened to those retention payments.
Yeah, so we sat down and we were negotiating, and we wanted to see 3% growth in the budget, but we wanted that to be focused on better reducing wait times, making sure everyone had a family doctor, making sure that if you needed care, you could get that care. And what happened is when we sat down in negotiations, the doctor said, you know what? The retention bonus is kind of embarrassing because we don't have a retention problem right now. So let's put that money back into the system to make it better for everyone, because they want to improve the system too. People go into a health profession because they care about patients. They want to make sure that everyone gets what they need, the right care in the right place at the right time. And that needs to be what we're really focused on. I'm going to read one of the questions that we have here. It was submitted by Dallas, and it says, as opposition today, what specific tools do we in the NDP have right now to slow or stop the erosion of public health care and constitutional norms before the next election?
Man, that is a hard question to answer. And what I need to convince people is if you want a better Alberta, if you want a better healthcare system, it's time to elect a better government. And our job, you and me, Sarah, is to show people we are that better government. And I hope that we'll be able to do that. One of the real challenges, and I'm sorry that I'm not going to give you more hope. Was it Dallas who asked the question? I'm sorry I'm not giving you more hope here, Dallas, because the government we have flouts all democratic norms. They're not interested in listening to the opposition. There have been multiple occasions since I've been in this job where we have found errors in their legislation, and we have shown them, look, you made a mistake here. Here's an amendment to fix it. We don't need We don't need the credit for it. Just fix it. And they wouldn't. And then in the next session, they're like, oh, we have a new bill to amend the old bill. So it's really, really hard to get through to them, for us to get through to them. But who can get through to them are citizens. So you got to make your voice loud. You got to tell people, we think this might violate the Canada Health Act. Yeah. We never asked for this. We certainly didn't vote for this. You said you'd fixed health care, Danielle Smith, in 90 days. It's been 1,200 days, and you're making it much, much worse. There's not a single Albertan who would tell you that healthcare works better now than it did 6 years ago when you were the health minister, Sarah. And
thanks, yeah.
And it wasn't just because you were the health minister, let's be clear. But that had a lot to do with it. But
well, we had a government that cared.
We had a government that cared.
A government that wanted public health care to work.
Did you see the latest? Today I just saw that the severance payments that we know about, not all of them, just the ones we know about, of people that the government is willfully firing, even if they handpicked them and hired them themselves, $30 million. $30 million would keep the orthopedics operating room at the Royal Alex Hospital in Edmonton running for 175 years. So this is crazy, crazy stuff. And we need citizens to get loud about this. And you know that the family just before Christmas that had the courage to talk about the loss of their husband and father, how hard was that? I couldn't even watch that video. It was hard for me.
Yeah.
But it changed the channel, at least in one way. And so we need Albertans to continue to speak out loudly. We will do it for you. We're going to fight for you every single day. We fight in the legislature. We fight on the streets. We fight in the media. We fight to tell your stories and amplify them. But we need your help, citizens, to be able to really show the government that what they're doing not only is against what they were elected to do, but quite frankly, if you voted for them before, you're not voting for them again because they've shown themselves to be that untrustworthy.
Mm-hmm. The next one's a statement that Robert posted on YouTube, and Robert says we need more family doctors in Alberta, and Robert is correct. One of the things I like to talk about in terms of our record is when we were in government, in every major municipality in Alberta, you could get a family doctor, and now we have nearly 1 million Albertans who don't have a family doctor or a nurse practitioner, somebody that they can go to when they're in need of that good ongoing regular care. So
are critical questions for us to answer, and I'm going to give the UCP government some credit here. The creation of the new family doctor only medical school programs in Grand Prairie and Lethbridge is a good move, but that is going to be, if depending on whether it's Lethbridge or Grand Prairie, 5 to 6 years before they graduate their first family doctor. So we have to ensure that we are doing the training, that we are building family doctors here. But we also have to have a very real conversation about barriers to entry that we have for international medical graduates. We have to have a real conversation about the role of nurse practitioners in the system and other primary care providers. You know way more about this than I do, Sarah. But it is absolutely the case that we have people leaving the system. And the UCP is forever telling us, oh, there's more doctors in Alberta now than there were before. But those stats are incredibly misleading. They're misleading because they don't look at population growth, but they're also misleading because they're not counting what's actually happening. If someone is retiring, but they're still doing, a shift a week in their old clinic, they're in the system. If, like one of my family's family doctors who closed her family practice and is now has a practice focused only on people with a particular chronic condition, she's still counted as a family doctor in the system. And that's because I don't want to speak for her, she had reasons, but that's because family doctors across the system are finding it's just too hard. My own family doc, he's got a young kid, and he will regularly be calling his patients with their lab results at 9 o'clock at night and hasn't gone home yet. Mm-hmm. And he's had to cut back his panel because it was bad for his own health. But he's just trying to do his job, and I'm so lucky to have him. I'm so lucky to have a family doctor when 1 million Albertans don't. Nearly 1 million Albertans don't. So, Sarah, to you then, how did you manage that situation when you were minister, and what would you say would be the right solutions now?
Well, and it's pretty simple. It's on lots of the United Nurses have had signs up on people's lawns. There's not as many now as there were 2 years ago, but they have 3 words: respect, recruit, retain. And that's it. If you start by showing respect to the people who work in the healthcare system instead of telling them that you know better, if you show healthcare workers that you honor their expertise, that you don't try to muzzle them, if you create an environment where they are protected, including things like being able to blow the whistle when they see something that's wrong happening in their workplace. We tried to get the UCP to pass legislation that we had on whistleblower protection and a motion around working on a workforce plan. We brought that forward in the fall, and you might recall, Naheed, the legislature, the UCP decided to adjourn the legislature on that Monday afternoon instead of actually debating public health care issues.
In the morning anyway, but they took 2-hour breaks so that they wouldn't have to talk about healthcare.
Exactly. So, so that's part of it. Showing that respect, sitting at the table, being a steady hand, and demonstrating that you want the system to succeed, instead of working so hard at firing people, drawing new org charts, trying to find new people to blame, causing chaos. It's pretty simple. If you are a steady hand and your heart's in the right place, people want to work with you and they want to find solutions. And that's been a big part of it. And they'll come to the table with solutions too. I want to go to...
Before you go to another question, you forgot one word in your little description right there. And that word, of course, is corruption. Mm-hmm. The levels of corruption in the system right now are shocking. And they should shock everyone. And I'm going to try, Sarah, and I've been trying to explain the whole corrupt care scandal in ways that people can get. But let me put it this way. The government has increased the use of private providers of everything from surgery to PPE, protective equipment.
Yeah.
One of the people who has done the best in this private system with a bunch of contracts, despite having no experience in healthcare, despite having a criminal record, I understand from the media reporting, despite having strings of failed businesses, has achieved maybe more than $1 billion in contracts of taxpayer money from this government. Now, that guy, just by pure coincidence, according to the Premier, is related to the Minister of Justice and his best friend, has been hosting UCP cabinet ministers, we don't know how many of them, at hockey games and other events. And this is money that should be going to be used in the front line. And by the way, when the CEO of AHS, Danielle Smith, handpicked CEO of AHS, there was no search. She hired this person. Athana Mentisopoulos. And when Ms. Mentisopoulos, who is a very qualified civil servant, said, I need to investigate this, she got fired. When the board of directors, who had the right to hire and fire her, the government did not, when the board of directors complained and said you didn't have any right to do that, the government fired the board of directors. And they've still not replaced them.
And they wanted to call in the RCMP.
When they wanted to call in the RCMP.
Yeah.
So there is an RCMP investigation. There is an Auditor General investigation, though they tried to fire the Auditor General. And they hired Justice Wyant to do an investigation in which Justice Wyant found serious wrongdoing. And yet, the government thinks that this is not coming back to haunt them. And I say, look, that's $1 billion. Imagine what that could have done if that had been used on the front lines of the healthcare system.
And that justice didn't have the right to subpoena witnesses or to make them swear
people
an oath
testify
to tell
under
the
oath, so
truth.
people refused to testify. He didn't talk to anyone in government or political staffers. The whole thing is a mess.
So what are we going to do to shine a light on it after the next election, should that be our opportunity?
Well, our call to the government's been very easy. Just call a public inquiry.
Yeah.
It could even be that same judge, if you want, because he's done a bunch of work already. But give him the right to call witnesses, give him the right to make people testify under oath, and broaden the scope of what he's looking at to be able to look at all of the corruption. And the government refuses to do that. And I say, look, the only people who refuse to call a public inquiry are people with something to hide.
Yep. And if they won't do it, then we will. There's another one here. It's from Devon, and it's not health, but it's really important, so I just want you to have a chance to answer it. And it's what can be done to reverse what's being done to AISH.
Oh, gosh. Well, it is health. It is about people's well-being. So what Devon is suggesting, there's a lot here. So this government one of our staff members coined the term that I've used a lot, is characterized by chaos, cuts, corruption, and cruelty. All C's. And the cruelty we see more than anywhere in how this government chooses to treat people with disabilities. So the government of Alberta, uniquely among all provincial governments in Canada, is clawing back $200 a month from the Canada Disability Benefit. People with disabilities have been advocating for so long to the federal government for some recognition that they live difficult and expensive lives. And the government came through with just $200 a month, which to many of us may not feel like a lot. But for a lot of people living with disabilities who are low income, that could be life-changing amount of money. Hell, if it just allows you to go to the movies once in a while, it's not such a bad thing. And this government, for no reason other than to save a few pennies while they're spending $1 billion on the corrupt care scandal, is clawing back that $200. So AISH recipients go from $1,900 to $1,700 a month effectively. They're also moving people who live on AISH into a new program where you have to prove, essentially, I'm oversimplifying, but you have to prove that you can or cannot work. But in the meantime, you're losing another $200 a month in your benefits. And if it finds out that you really can't work, you have to reapply for AISH and start again from the back of the queue. In addition to that, the government is changing how it uses the calculation of AISH benefits towards calculating rent in affordable housing. So many AISH recipients are seeing an increase in their rent if they live in government affordable housing where the rent is geared to your income. They're seeing an increase in their rent of $300 to $500 a month. These are people who live on $1,900 a month. Mm-hmm. And are we saving tons of money by doing this? No. Are we rooting out horrible fraud and abuse? Absolutely not. Are we treating people who deserve some dignity like they're frauds, like they're cheats, like they're cheating the system when they're living in pain every single day? Yes. And are we saving a ton of money doing this? No. Mm-hmm. And this is a government that has no reason to do this except that they like to be cruel. And that's a horrible, mean thing for me to say, but I've never seen anything like it before. A government that treats politics all too often like it's a wrestling match, and they want the crowd to cheer when they pound the person into the mat. And the people they pound into the mat are the most vulnerable Albertans, and I just won't stand for it.
Just because you've given such a great transition for me to mention this, I remember my first meeting with Verna Yu and the board chair and my deputy minister.
Verna Yu was the CEO of AHS at the time.
Yeah, exactly. So the CEO, the board chair of AHS, and my deputy minister, I remember saying, when people think about healthcare, I don't want them to think about any of us. I want them to think about their doctor, their nurse, the paramedic who's going to come and save them when they need it. Like, let's make it less about us and let's make it more about patients and workers. And that's what government should be doing. But they love the drama. They love the chaos. They're doing it to people on AISH. They do. And, people's lives, people who are severely handicapped, that's what AISH stands for. People who need to go to the emergency room and get help, like, they don't deserve the drama. They don't deserve to be in the middle of somebody's, novel. This is people's lives. And anyway, I just needed to get that off my chest. So thank you.
And should we form government, inshallah, as I always say,
inshallah.
God willing. Folks, we don't love the drama. And my goal will be that you don't have to wake up every morning and say, what did the government do now? That we will take our feet off your metaphorical throats, let you breathe again, and let you live lives knowing that the services you need will be there when you need them, and no one is going to war on you or your kids.
That's it. So we have a petition that I want to have a chance to highlight. We have to wrap up. First of all, I want to thank all the staff for all their amazing troubleshooting to get us
They did such a
together
great
here
job
tonight.
and I think their heartbeats are starting to come back to normal now.
I hope so.
No, they're
And
shaking their heads. No, they're not. Not until we hit no.
And I want to thank everyone who's tuned in, who sent in questions ahead of time, who wrote questions into the YouTube live tonight or on Facebook, and everyone for engaging on this. I know that we didn't get to as many of them as we wanted to, but we really appreciate all of your feedback and all of the things that you've highlighted. And I want you to know that we have a petition specifically around taking action on healthcare. So we're going to be tabling it in the legislature. So one of the things sometimes people say to me, I don't know if they say it to you, they're like, oh, it must be so hard to be in there in the legislature across from those guys. And I say, I know a lot of people outside of the legislature scream their heads off trying to be heard. And in the legislature, it's my job to be heard. It's my job to speak out.
Extraordinary privilege that we hold. There's only 87 of us who have the ability to hold in our hands, just for a minute, the hopes and dreams and fears of our neighbors. And so, sometimes when I'm driving to Edmonton on a Monday morning, on wintry roads, and I'm thinking about all the stuff they're going to pull on us this week, I get a bit frustrated, and then I remind myself of that first day when I walked in there and realized Albertans have entrusted something in me. I think I am, do you know your number, Sarah? I think I am the 852nd MLA, something like that. No, I'm in the 900s.
I'm 850, so you must be.
I'm in the 900s, maybe 952, something like that.
Sounds right.
So fewer than 1,000 people have had this opportunity in the whole long history of this place. And to me, it's something I take very seriously every single day.
So one of the ways you can help us do our jobs is sign the petition. We've got it at albertahealthcrisis.ca. Again, that's albertahealthcrisis.ca, or you can just Google Alberta New Democrat Caucus health petition. It'll probably be the first thing that pops up, but add your name to that petition. Make sure your voice is heard and that government knows that you care about public health care and that you want them to take their job seriously. And it helps us amplify your voice and that message when we head back to the legislature later this month.
All so much. Enjoy the nice weather across the province while we've got it, but mostly enjoy the fact that we live here and that we have the ability to build something so great here. And we deserve a better government, and Sarah and Rakhi and I and all of our colleagues will work hard every single day to be that better government that every single one of you deserve. Good night and stay well.